Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you. Janine has hit the record button. Thanks everyone for joining our first GSI sort of seminar style event of this term. We're doing a slightly more interactive type session this time. So Tim Lenton is going to spend up to 30 minutes giving an overview of some of his recent work and the recent conversations that he and others at the GSI have been having around positive tipping points. And then the second half, we will shift into a more kind of interactive discussion. We thought we would try having 5 or 10 minutes of any clarifying questions or just general ideas for kind of theme areas, and then maybe split into a few breakout rooms to discuss some particular sub-themes that people might be interested in, and then come back for 5-10 minutes at the end to wrap up and report back. So that sounds good. We can press ahead with that. I'm sure most of you on the call are familiar with Tim, so I don't think he needs a huge amount of introduction. But just to suffice to say, he is a professor of climate change and earth system science in the Department of Geography at the university, also our fearless director at the Global Systems Institute. He's been widely recognized for his work on the kind of biogeophysical tipping points that may exist in the Earth's climate system. And that was, I guess, the origin of this concept of positive social tipping points that we're going to talk about today. So with that, I will hand over to Tim to give his introduction. Tim, are you able to share screen?
Yeah, well, it should be. Well, let's see in a minute, Guy. I'll score when it doesn't work. But thanks for the intro. Thanks to so many of you for coming along. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be alone in having spent like decades of my career diagnosing the problem of climate change, and of course, waving the red flag on the possibility that we might be passing some tipping points in the climate system. But I mean, I think for me, it's high time to stop diagnosing the problem, and I think we all know in our hearts of hearts that we're staring at the need for transformative rates of change now across society, technologies, relationship with ecology, other living things. And so, yeah, my message that I hope to inspire some of you to join in with today is positive tipping points really do exist. We need to work together to articulate where they are and how they might be triggered by us, by policy, by other sectors, by a confluence of all of them. Who knows? That's the task. But I just wanted to have a session like this to talk a bit about mostly work that's underway rather than finished, and hope to inspire some of you to join in the work, because I think we have an opportunity as an anarchic collective, or however we define ourselves, as an institute, to do something really special and distinctive and world leading on this. It is true as well that even the university marketing, such as it is, has got behind this. And if I forget to show you at the end, I have right at the end of the slides some videos that some of you are in that have been made already to put our best foot forward on this idea of positive tipping points. So if we're already marketing ourselves on this, we really need to follow through on that. Anyway, without further ado, let's get going. So here's Chris Bolton made this movie. Here's a little movie of a system, generic system that's going to pass the tipping point. It had 2 different stable states. It could only be in one of them, but the one it started in is losing stability over time. And in a minute, it's going to tip into the other state. Now, there we go. That's a toy model that could apply to many kinds of complex systems, and it could apply to good inverted commas or bad inverted commas tipping points. Today, I want to talk about positive tipping points. And some recent work by others and by colleagues internationally has started to gravitate towards this idea, which is in essence that if we're going to get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions in 1 generation by the middle of this century, and we're going to get ourselves out of an ecological emergency, my word, we need to accelerate the rates of transformative social change from what they are now. So we need, in other words, to find some and trigger some positive tipping points that are going to accelerate change. And this figure, taken from Ilona Otto, Jonathan Dongi's and others' paper, sort of shows pretty much the same cartoon I was just drawing, but now it's got some sort of concepts on it. The notion that there's a business as usual state of societies in the economy, and there's some other state we need to get to. And maybe one way we get there is by lowering this hump. But what does all this mean in conceptual terms? And what are we really looking for if we're going to look for that positive tipping point? Well, when we draw like a ball in a valley, like you saw in the movie or in this picture here, we're saying that whatever the incumbent way of doing things is in the world, or regime, some people call it, that it has a load of what we call well, mathematically we would call them negative feedbacks, but things that basically resist change from the current way of doing things. And that's why we draw a valley and we give it slopey sides. And if you move the ball, you push out the side of the valley and it wants to roll back to the bottom. That's a description of damping or negative feedbacks that want to maintain the status quo. But if we want to create a tipping point of change, we're talking about needing the opposite. We're talking about trying to get to a situation where mathematically positive feedbacks, that is self-amplifying sort of closed loops of causality in mathsy language, dominate the behavior of a system, and they propel self-propelling, accelerating change from one state to another. So that's the game, essentially. Underpinning the idea of positive tipping points, we need to be working to identify what are those reinforcing feedbacks that could lead to accelerating, self-propelling, transformative change. And how strong are they? And can we make them stronger, if you like? And the flip side of that, of course, is to remember that there are always these damping negative feedbacks trying to maintain the incumbent status quo. And there'll be a whole lot of other negative feedbacks that will re-stabilize the new state once we've done the great sustainability transformation, or whatever you want to call it. But we're concerned about making the transition, right? So anyway, let's just start with a bit of history. If you don't know it already, you should know that there have been transformative rates of social and technological change repeatedly in the past. This is a favorite example. This is Easter Parade, Fifth Avenue, New York City in the year 1900, where the task is to spot the only person in an automobile when everybody else is in a horse-drawn carriage. 13 years later, you have the converse challenge to spot the only people left in a horse-drawn carriage when everybody else is in an automobile. Same street, same celebration, same day of the year, 13 years later. Actually, that transformation happened across US cities within a decade. In the middle of the transformation, about 30% of the vehicles in the early 1900s were battery electric with lead acid batteries. It's an interesting story in itself, which you can ask me a question about. Why did we end up with the Model T Ford and the internal combustion engine? So anyway, that was to give you a taster that extraordinary rates of social technological change have happened before, and things are path dependent and they don't always go down retrospectively the desirable path. But cars are not the only thing that came upon us quickly. Here's a bit of data, summarizing on the left, loads of what are called S-curve transitions in which there have been tipping points of uptake of new technology. And on the right, I'm summarizing the crucial part here, some well-known reinforcing or mathematically positive feedbacks that can propel this kind of accelerating change. So we have common language terms for these things. Learning by doing. The more something is made, the better it can be made. Or you might say the more something is done, the better it can be done. Economies of scale. The more something's made, the more cheaply it can be made. And also this one I haven't got a good name for. The more something is used, the more technologies emerge that make it more useful. Those are all crucial reinforcing feedbacks in this society-technology relationship that can support tipping point change when those feedbacks get strong enough. They aren't always strong enough to create a tipping point, but they clearly can get strong enough. And we'll see a few examples that they have and they are in the rest of the talk. The other side of this is, of course, society. It's not, you know, there are intrinsic reinforcing feedbacks in society, and they get called by academics sometimes, some of them get called social contagion, which is at core the idea that we sometimes imitate each other, and that the things we're imitating can spread like wildfire through society, especially now we're all socially networked together, or some of you are. I'm still avoiding social media like the plague. But anyway, new norms, new behaviors, and the uptake of new technologies can spread exponentially through this process of social contagion. Typically, there's a threshold percentage of society that needs to adopt some new norms or some new thing, and then the rest will follow. And that percentage varies for lots of reasons, but can be like ballpark 20% of the population. Anyway, we've seen social contagion for the good, for the uptake of some sustainable technologies unfolding around us, including rooftop solar panels. Here's my little movie of part of the US, part of Colorado in the US between 2012 and 2015, where you see this social contagion happening and literally neighbors copying each other in putting solar panels on their roofs. And now let's come to another example of evidence for an actual positive tipping point happening. This one is finally, a century or so later, the uptake of electric vehicles to replace those internal combustion engines that started with the Model T Ford. This tipping point apparently has been reached in Norway, and so I'm expressing it here. The axes are the difference in price between an electric car and a petrol or diesel car on the x-axis in terms of a monthly payment, and the market share of electric vehicles on the y-axis. And this is the 2019 data, and Norway's now at like 2/3 electric vehicle sales, so it's up here somewhere. So it would appear a very simple kind of price effect. There's much more to it than this, by the way, ask me the questions, but it appears like there's a very strong non-linearity, as us mathematically minded people would say, and that as you get to price parity, you suddenly electric vehicle take over in terms of what we want to buy. Interestingly, the Netherlands in December 2020 had 60% electric vehicle sales. So indeed, they looked like they were the next ones that were going to tip, and now they are tipping. And the good news story with EVs is, well, it's partly about economies of scale. There's a reason why they're the same price to buy in Norway, and that's because of very clever policy incentives, which we can talk about in detail later if you want. But it's actually going to be the same price to manufacture an electric vehicle in about 3 years' time in most of the world. So it'll definitely be as cheap or cheaper to buy one than an internal combustion engine car. And why is that the case? Well, it's because of economies of scale for the crucial part of the vehicle that's has been adding significantly to the price, and that's the battery, the bit in green on the bottom plot. Look at how the price of battery is going down, and that's because of this thing up on the top right, economies of scale. The more batteries we make, the cheaper it gets to make the next battery. So classic reinforcing feedback leading to clear tipping point that's already happened in one place. And the challenge, the stuff that I've been working on with Simon Sharp in the UK Cabinet Office in the COP26 unit is, well, what actors could come together to make this tipping point spread globally sooner? China, EU, and California is our answer. But also, how does that one tipping point for electric vehicles enable other tipping points in what we would call an upward scaling tipping cascade? So basically, as you have the electric vehicle revolution and batteries are getting cheaper, that opens up the opportunity for other tipping points, kind of obvious ones like electrify goods transport, but much less obvious, but perhaps more powerful ones like, hold on a minute, once we've got loads of cheap batteries, this could help solve the fundamental problem with renewable power, which is the imbalance between supply of electricity when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, and demand when you want to put the kettle on in a break in the football or whatever. So basically, cheap battery storage is an essential part potentially of enabling a renewable electricity or power revolution. So let me switch to the power sector and tell you one other good news story if you haven't heard it already, which is we've had a tipping point in UK power generation. We've got rid of coal power in less than a decade. And Simon and I had a little look at what was going on to trigger that. What was the tipping point? And it's a bit too complicated, this, but basically there's a few things going on. We've been building renewable power capacity in the UK. And as a taxpayer, I'm very happy I've been subsidising that. And as of now, I'm no longer subsidising it, and offshore wind is paying me back a thank you for subsidising it in the past. But then we also have, of course, we had coal and gas burning for power generation. Now, typically, if you don't put a price on carbon pollution, coal's cheaper than gas for electricity production. So you're always going to go for coal. But crucially, through policy, those scales got tipped. So there's always, for a long time, there's been an EU price on carbon for power generation, and it's the grey shaded area. But UK policymakers, with some foresight and some luck, put on an additional price on carbon emissions just in the power sector, which is the blue shaded area, stacking on top of the grey one. And then the red line is what's called the coal to gas switching price, but it's the point at which, where the red line crosses the blue shaded area is basically the point at which it becomes cheaper to go to a gas powered station once you've got all your renewable electricity you can, rather than fire up a coal fired one. And we seem to cross that point in the UK around the end of 2015, and thanks to the carbon price, stay below it consistently for a while thereafter. And that had this profound effect. It's been a key contributor to this nosedive in the black line of coal power generation, from 40% of electricity in 2012 to basically zero pretty much today. And it had this really interesting internal dynamics that it started as a potentially reversible thing, the coal to gas switching. So what, that could have flickered back the next week. But what happened was investor expectations were changed, and the people who were invested in coal power suddenly realized that the economics were going against it, and they pulled out. And then irreversible changes start to happen. This is the destruction of Didcot Power Station, coal-fired power station, a couple of years ago. We're never going to go back on that decision. So we have got an irreversible tipping point we can be proud of there in the UK, and you can see what nudged it. Globally, the price of solar PV and the price of offshore wind are going down these amazing economies of scale cost curve. That's the solar PV one. And in simple terms, if you take out all the perverse subsidies for coal, especially for coal power stations and coal burning, it's now, as of a year ago, most of the world is generating, the cheapest electricity generation is from renewables. Yellow is solar, blue is wind. And a smaller fraction of the world was still the case that fossil fuels were cheaper. So we're reaching this global tipping point, which is called, if you want the techie details, a sort of new for new comparison, where new renewable power is cheaper than new coal or gas power. Most of the world's gone through that tipping point already, and it's racing towards the next tipping point, which is where it makes economic sense to shut down an existing fossil fuel power station with useful life left in it and replace it with new renewables. So that's exciting, hopefully. And I mentioned how those things feed back on each other. Basically renewable power is enabled by low-cost batteries, but it also makes the whole electrification of transport make even more sense. And with those things propelling each other, that then starts to open up avenues for other things, like excess renewable generating capacity can be dumped into making totally clean hydrogen that then helps further decarbonize transport and opens up opportunities in industry and so on and so forth. Happy days. But maybe it all feels a little bit distant to you, or maybe you're not turned on, by power and transport and those sectors. Maybe you're more interested in food or land systems or diet. Well, I kind of was curious about that as well. So just a brief advert to say that some of us are working right now on, well, what are potential positive tipping points for diet, food and land systems? And we're working with a particular think tank, systemic or SystemlQ, depending on your taste. This is a work in progress. This is a sort of work in progress plot from a report we're working on together and a paper we're working on together. But as you can see, the exercise we need to do for any of these positive tipping points is we need to identify the reinforcing feedbacks. And then with systemic, we're also working on what are the key conditions to sort of underpin reaching a tipping point? What are the interventions and by which actors that could trigger the tipping? And of course, you've also got to have a vision of where you want to get to, the desired state of the system, as well as a knowledge of the current state and all those balancing feedbacks that want to maintain the status quo. And one of the team at Systemic, interestingly, is Theo Ewer, who used to be a geography student at Exeter a few years ago. And this is Theo's sketch, which I've blatantly copied here, just to show you the sort of work in progress on this exercise to look for candidate tipping points. And Theo's particularly working on one for dietary transformation towards a healthy and planetary healthy diet, where we think Europe is perhaps the part of the world where that has the best chance of happening first. But we're also looking at a case study of tipping point for regenerative agriculture, as some people call it, with an Indian context. And we're looking at one which is essentially regenerating or forests or regrowing forests, where we're using the example with the partners we've worked with that are called TIST, who are a small network of smallholder farmers in Kenya planting trees on their land. So lots of good stuff there, and we'd love others to join in with it. And we're not the first people to be doing this, right? So if you've never seen it before, check out ecotippingpoints.com. There's about 100 case studies on ecotippingpoints.com of community level positive tipping points. This is one from Rajasthan in India, which was essentially about going back to an old technology, these mud dams called johads, reinstating those as a way of capturing the monsoonal rains, which then drain down, fill the aquifer, boost the forests all around the village, but also crucially give you enough water in the aquifer to support agricultural irrigation and get all the attendant positive paybacks for the village of selling your crops. And all of this hinged on supporting a traditional village level governance in that part of India. So that's one example. Like I said, there's 100 on ecotippingpoints.com. Another one that we might see some echoes closer to the city of Exeter from is the community gardens movement that started in the Bronx in New York in the 1970s, in a time of kind of social and ecological breakdown, if you like, in one of the most deprived parts of a city that was in crisis. You saw communities come together and start for the first time to take a derelict space and turn it into what we now think of or know as a community garden. That was a fantastic virtuous cycle that's continued to spread around the world as an idea and an action. And what some of us have been working on for the last 3 or 4 months is what we're calling the Exeter Living Lab, with this fantastic self-organized group called Pivot Projects, and also with the great Exeter City Future support. We've come together to try and think about mapping Exeter and the city and the hinterland as a system, in the pursuit of identifying some of these virtuous circles that could underpin positive tipping points towards sustainability, flourishing future for us here in our locale. So this is a not quite up-to-date snapshot of the systems map that several people on this call have been helping build, more than I have. We're at the point where we want to drill into that map and spot and interrogate some of the virtuous circles that are buried within it. And we would hoping that several of our MSc project students will be picking up some of those virtuous circles with partners and looking at how we can make them real. So if you want to join in with that, you know where to come. And okay, I may have expended my time, but I had one kind of closing idea, which is for a long time, some of us have worked on the idea that you can get early warning, generic early warning signals of a tipping point. So same movie we started with from Chris, but now we show an early warning indicator in red that we know the tipping point is coming because we know that the incumbent regime, which is losing stability, that change shows up. It means the incumbent regime doesn't recover from shocks and nudges from the world as quickly as it used to. And we can see that. We can see that in how it behaves in what we call time series data. So why wouldn't we use that early warning capability to go on the hunt in data for systems that might be amenable to tipping that we want to tip? Like, I don't know, we'll come to it in a minute, but like the electric vehicle revolution. So in this case, Peter Cox and Mark Williamson were already thinking about this, and they made a little toy model. It's not strictly the same toy model. It's more like this going towards the points in a railway where it's not, you have to kind of imagine that the rails blur out before you get to the bifurcation point where you could go one way or the other. But that's basically what this little movie is going to show. And the idea it's going to illustrate is that, let me get it running. It's going to illustrate that if we didn't force this particular system, totally generic toy system, then it was going to go down one track, and there it is going down the one track. But if we used early warning signals, we'd be able to see that the bifurcation point was coming, and then we could nudge the system deliberately, and that's what sent it in the pink line down the other track, using the early warning signals to know when to apply a bit of, whether it's policy intervention or, I don't know, political uprising or whatever you like, practical action to send a system in a desired direction. So well done, chaps, for making that model. And to come back to one of my earlier examples, well, we've begun to try and get hold of some real data to start looking to see whether we might operationalize this idea. So it happened that I was asked to give a seminar to the car sector because I've been talking about positive tipping points for electric vehicles. And it happened a couple of months ago that Auto Trader got very excited about these stuff I was talking about and sent us this magnificent data they have of electric car advert views on the Auto Trader site. And just eyeballing that data, I became a little curious that doesn't it look like there might be some slowing down in the system, like lingering attention on new models of electric vehicle as we go along. So Chris has been helping out again. We got the data off them, took the trend out of the data, that's all part of the analysis, and then started looking at how is the fluctuations in attention on electric vehicles changing before you get to some very marked spikes of increased attention. So our underlying hypothesis or idea is that as faith in or support for the incumbent petrol diesel cars is declining, these interest and attention in the new, every time an electric vehicle model is launched or whatever, will get more sticky and there'll be more persistent interest. And that's the signal that actually appears to be present in this data. When you take the trend out, you start to see these longer lived fluctuations. It's the same classic early warning signal of an approaching tipping point, and it shows up in the statistical indicators. It's basically these larger, longer lived fluctuations than were going on before. We can measure that with these things called autoregression and rising variance. So I know it's a tantalizing thought, isn't it? And maybe one that floats some of your boats more than others, that we could use our mathsy complex systems capability to look for incipient tipping points, and then that would help guide whoever wants to trigger them. So yeah, sorry, I used up my half an hour. I was hoping to be quicker, but I'll leave a slide here up just sort of to briefly, hopefully I've given you a taster of lots of funky stuff that is beginning to happen. And I'd love it if as a community, more of you would love to get involved and we can make more of this stuff happen. And now we've got half an hour, we could brainstorm and chat about some cool things we might do. and maybe I'll circulate the slides later, but the rest of the slides were to include the videos that some of you have helped make, advertising this positive tipping points idea, and some of these avenues we might take it in. Thanks a lot.
Amazing, thank you, Tim. That was really yeah, a great and incredibly time efficient tour through an awful lot of work and an awful lot of ideas. There's already a great set of debates going on in the chat about tipping points in food choices and electric vehicles, so that's amazing. Yeah, please, if anyone has any clarifying questions or just suggestions for tipping points, or perhaps kind of theme areas that we go to in the breakout groups, either raise your hand or pop them in the chat. There was already one question, which I'll maybe put to Tim while we wait for people to write.
Do that, Guy, because I'm amazed. That's fantastic. 35 things in the chat.
So Tim Malone asks, were previous social tipping points generally engineered by clever business people and entrepreneurs, or did they just happen and take everyone by surprise, including manufacturers?
Probably a little more of the latter than the former, Tim, but usually, interestingly, a mixture of both. Of course, there's a whole field called science and technology studies, which critically appraises the way we tell stories about how things unfolded in the future, and is a wonderful literature to read. And if one was to think of an example where it looked like a deliberate tipping point, I think one of the most compelling is the Green Revolution. You know, in the 50s, some plant scientists and some policy people got together and thought, blimey, we've got a problem on our hands here. Population is growing, yields are not increasing. This, you know, we could hit Malthus's buffers here. How are we going to fix this? I would have to look to the STS literature, as it's called, to see if that's really the way it was. But that's the one that looks to me like the most like deliberate tipping point. Create the dwarf varieties of wheat and rice, get the intensive fertilizers, blah, 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 make it happen. The electric vehicles in Norway is such a cool story. I won't waste the time, but I could give a longer talk about how the pop band Aha started all that by importing a hobby converted Fiat Panda to an electric vehicle. So electric, kind of imagine this electric Fiat Panda in 1989 that they bought off a Swiss environmentalist. They imported it to Norway. They proceeded to persuade the government not to charge the import or the registration tax, which is on all cars in Norway, because no one makes cars in Norway. And that immediately created a good incentive for more electric vehicles. And later on, they persuaded them, after 10 years of squabbling, to scrub road tax for EVs. And that, again, helped bring the tipping point forward. And the government twigged what was happening and then came up with more deliberate policies to make that Norway electric vehicle tipping point be the first in the world. So those were deliberate to a degree, but there's always chance and there's several. That's the beauty of complex systems. You've got to play in a space where there's both deliberate intention and there's dynamics beyond your control, and there's evolution. And that's the space I want us to play in as an institute and as creative people.
Thanks, Tim. There's one more question from the chat, and then I'll go to Bethany, who has her hand up. The question from the chat was on the electric vehicles tipping point specifically, what is the prospect around limitations in supply of rare earths for that tipping point? How does that play into it?
It's a real issue. I mean, there's also social issues, of course, around what are the conditions for the miners who are mining the lithium. Everything that's ever been extracted from the ground has basically got that issue. I mean, coal mining has been fatal to many people, many coal miners. So yeah, I'm not unaware of those concerns around this technology. There are, of course, advances in alternative battery technologies. Arguably, the royal we should have done more focused R&D on this consistently for decades. But you know, it's a live area, and some other viable battery technologies that improve on lithium ion are in the academic literature, so can't be that far away from market either. So yes, it's a real issue, but this is a fast moving space where I don't think it'll just be lithium ion batteries and lithium. Of course, there'll be some other rare earth issue, but the point is, we shouldn't delude ourselves that we can avoid that. As living things, we have to take in material and energy from our surroundings. We have to transform them, and we have to degrade what, as physicists, we call lower entropy waste products in order to stay alive. And the same is true of the great sustainability transformation. Some of it should be done through energy efficiency for sure, and enjoying the little things in life. But we have also got to build a whole new infrastructure around us, and that's going to take materials and it's going to take energy. Happily, we're going to get the energy for free from sunlight and the wind, and the sooner we do that, the better. But there's still the material element. And yeah, I want to get to a circular material economy where we're remaking stuff out of the stuff we already have. But there's no credible projection where we don't need to dig some more stuff out of the ground to change the infrastructure and the technology. I wish it were otherwise, but yeah, point well taken. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Tim. Bethany has her hand raised.
Thank you very much. I was wondering, when you were talking about the bifurcating possibilities on tipping points, you sort of said either it could be done through policy, and you've given several examples, or you said, or we could have a social uprising or something like that. I was
glibly, yeah, or. I mean, spot on, Bethany. There must be like 500-700 different agents or actors or ways or participants in the tipping. What I'm trying to get across, perhaps not very eloquently, is I think this idea gives us all back a sense of agency when many of us might be feeling profoundly disempowered by an issue as apparently enormous as climate change and as decarbonizing the global economy. I feel, I'm sure I'm not alone, disenfranchised by the thought that, oh God, all I can do is join Fridays for Future on the streets and squawk that the government hasn't fixed the problem for me. Well, we should do that, and we have done that, but this can give us back the sense of agency, because like I said, it was AHA, or the creative disruptors, who kind of started the electric vehicle revolution in Norway. Obviously, lots of other factors had to come into play, and we're not all pop stars, but my point is many diverse actors could be the beginnings, and their coalitions can be the beginning of change that escalates up in scale. That's the key point.
I guess my question was really, how do you discern in any given situation which is the better option?
I'm not sure you have to, which is a perverse answer, I know. But what I'm getting at there is we all belong, whether we like it or not, to an intellectual tradition a few hundred years old that we call modernism. That's how we've been educated, and that sets the structures around us. And in the modernist paradigm, the world is a gigantic machine, and we manage it and control it. Just to put it in simple terms, I don't buy that anymore. I never bought it, but I definitely don't buy it now. So I don't think. I mean, we do want. We have times and we have structures that allow us to some degree to manage things. But when we're talking about creating transformative change, which is what we're talking about here, I think it is, antithetical in many ways to that modernist paradigm. And we can't expect to have a perfect model of how it will unfold. It's always going to have some unknowable qualities. It's always got these evolutionary qualities. There's always lots of messiness and agency. Yes, you will be able to say, well, some actors can do action X, and it's kind of easy to say that, and easier to say that for policymakers. And yes, that can have some guiding role. But everybody who understands this transitions theory would kind of concur, I think, that when you get into the tipping point change, you have to accept that is a voluntarily giving up some control and letting the dynamics run the day or rule the day. And I think that fundamentally conflicts with what we're all brought up to, this mindset of modernism. So I'm not at all surprised that what I'm saying might jar in some quarters and might be hard to compute, because I find it quite hard to work all that stuff through. But I hope I'm conveying a little bit about why my answer would be, it may be it may be impossible to imagine that you can define a best actor and a best course of action, because that is the management paradigm, and we're trying to get out of that kind of, we'd want to get away from too simple a kind of mechanistic view of the world. Everything can be controlled, we can manage this. We need to learn to live in a world where there's lots of living agency, lots of feedback, lots of complexity. It's not hopeless. I've shown you that there's still some power there's still some predictive power in there, but there's also some irreducible uncertainty. It's about embracing the complexity. It's about understanding that. It's about learning ways of navigating the ship, or whatever you want to call it, influencing where you can, but not deluding ourselves that there's one best course of action, or one way we can control things. I hope that's a bit of a rambling answer, but I hope that weirdly rambling answer sort of conveys a bit about where I'm coming from. So yeah, that tension between management and control, but also trust in the system, trust in things you can't control, get the complex systems view on it. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Tim and Bethany. So there's lots of conversation going on in the chat, so this might be a good time just to put people into breakout groups for a few minutes to just throw around some ideas. So should I set up the five groups that Tim you outlined in your penultimate slide, and then people could choose which one they fancy joining? I think we've got enough people on the call that probably just go ahead with that.
And I think the thing to know, everybody, is it doesn't matter which breakout group you end up in. It's fun to have a smaller group conversation, and it'll be hopefully productive anyway. So I'd go for it, Guy. Yeah, give it it's an experiment. We've got to learn by doing. Let's do an experiment.
Okay, give me 1 second to set this up then.
And then we'll have time to come back together, will we, Guy, at the end for a bit of plenary?
Yeah, I'll do it for 10 minutes, and then we can have kind of 8 minutes at the end. But I'm just going to set these up and type the names, and then maybe are there any particular kind of things that where we'd like people to focus on, or questions to ponder in the groups, or just let it have an open discussion?
Yeah, I think I've said more than enough, folks, and by the level of interest in the chat, I've achieved my objective, which was to spark some general interest here. And this is just one seminar, but my hope is this could help start something. I feel like we've started something already, but we want to carry it on. So that's really where I'm going, where I hope we're going together today is, just do the groups for us at random, Guy. Well done, Tim. That's exactly what I mean with this said. So yeah, I can see a massive stuff in the chat, which I won't have time to go through while we're chatting, but someone will save the chat, and I might try and write later if there's specific questions just on the detail, thanks. Can't hear you, Guy.
I just launched a group of breakout rooms, so you should be getting invitations to join. One of them I forgot to name. Hang on.
Room 5. Yeah, that's fine.
Open discussion. I think that was meant to be tipping points emerging from COVID-19 lockdown, but we can just pick up whatever theme people are interested in.
And someone will be saving the chat or recording from the breakout, so we can carry continuity this afterwards, Guy. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm not entirely sure how it works in breakout rooms in terms of how the chat is saved. It should be around, but I'm actually not totally sure.
Don't worry.
We'll have to be taking notes. Are people getting notifications to join, or?
You just hit the breakout rooms thing at the bottom, don't you, folks?
Oh, hang on.
I'm gonna try disappearing and moving around. You're the boss, Guy.
Sorry, I think I've done this wrong. Apologies for that. Yeah. yeah, so please hit the breakout rooms at the bottom and select one or.
Guy, I think people need to be co-hosts before they
Oh.
can really move between breakout rooms. Otherwise, you've got to sort of randomly assign people.
All right, I'm sorry. I mean, you know what? I might have to close them all and just launch them again. I had this all worked out beforehand. I'm sorry about this. Now not letting me start any new ones until the old ones have been another 40 seconds. So sorry about that. Yeah, anyone just feels like having some discussion on here, then that would also is also fine. Okay, options, allow participants to choose room, open all rooms. There we go. That should work for people now.
Discussion in the chat asking for a separate GSI meeting on tipping points in food systems. So I think perhaps we should think about organising one of them, following on from the report we're writing with Systemic at the moment. It could be an event for later in the term.
Yeah.
I can't see any breakout rooms.
If you click the breakout rooms button at the bottom,
There
does it
isn't
go up on
one.
the list?
There isn't one.
I don't have one either, Guy.
I've got one because I'm special.
Well done, all of you.
I'm not special.
I may just randomly assign people to rooms then, if that's.
Yeah, I can see there's the ominous room 5. What's going on in there, Guy?
Don't ask about room 5.
I want to join room 5. Oh, can I? I can't. Okay, I'm being invited. I'm being subtly ushered. Okay.
I'm assigning
Yeah.
people. Sorry about the confusion with these. Yeah, I think the recording might function for the breakout room, so we'll have a slightly patchy record of the call, but I think we've got some good ideas. Right, welcome back, everyone. Sorry, I left a few extra minutes just because I thought it would be nice for people to have a little longer to get into their topics in the breakout rooms. It now means that it's 1 minute to 3, so understand when people have to go to alternative meetings. I hope the breakout room discussions themselves were interesting and people felt energized by some of the ideas. I don't know if anyone wants to share anything in particular. If anyone fancies staying on for an extra couple of minutes, but otherwise, in case you will need to go, we'll say thank you to everyone for joining and hope that this is the the start of a lot of exciting conversations.
Yeah, thanks everyone for your enthusiasm and coming, and that tells me we should have another of these seminars and then another and another, so we can keep building our own little positive tipping point. Have a great afternoon.
Everyone's going. I've got a very quick question about logistics and going forward.
Yes.
I suppose maybe it's for you, Guy, as well as you, Tim. Are we gonna kind of curate some of these discussions online, like I don't know, not necessarily a Slack or a Teams group or something, or do we want to meet up again at some point in the not too distant future? Has anyone thought about that? Because I think there's loads of excitement for this.
Yeah, I hope it happens, James. I just can't do everything, so I look to others to help me. I would love us to convene the first in-person Positive Tipping Points International Jamboree, or whatever you want to call it. I know that a friend of mine is making the first online one next month, I think, but wouldn't it be great if we hosted the first real one when we're allowed? But yeah, something simpler before we get there would be great as well.
Yeah, we can think about maybe a Teams community or something that could follow up on this, or I know because those things tend to start well and then tail off. Maybe we just set up some individual sessions that are on particular themes. Nikki, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, just as a member of the Exeter Living Lab, I'd be really pleased to have conversations based on the systems map for Exeter and the virtual positive tipping points from the Exeter lab. It'd be lovely to be able to discuss those with this group and to be able to, put more energy, but also more evidence and whatever behind them. Maybe you're already going to do that, but I really appreciate that.
Fantastic. Thank you. That sounds great. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I also want to say thanks to Danine and Rayanne, who were helping to kind of put together the structure and ideas for this session, and I think helped to kind of facilitate the breakout. So thanks to you both as well. Let's keep going and do some more of these in future.
The tipping point has started. Yay.